well, said Bilbo, who was anxious to agree until he found out more about the creature, whether he was quite alone, whether he was fierce or hungry, and whether he was a friend of the goblins. You ask first, he said, because he had not had time to think of a riddle. So Gollum hissed.
What has roots as nobody sees, is taller than trees. Up, up it goes, and yet never grows.
Easy, said Bilbo. Mountain, I suppose.
Does it guess easy? It must have a competition with us, my precious. If Precious asks, and it doesn't answer, we eats it, my precious. If it asks us, and we doesn't answer, then what we does what it wants, eh? We shows it the way out, yes?
All right, said Bilbo, not daring to disagree, and nearly bursting his brain to think of riddles that could save him from being eaten. 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. That was all he could think of to ask. The idea of eating was rather on his mind. It was rather an old one, too, and Gollum knew the answer as well as you do.
Chestnuts, chestnuts, he hissed. Teef, teef, my precious, but we only has 6.
Then he asked his second.
Voiceless it cries, wingless flutters, toothless bits, mouthless mutters.
Have a moment, cried Bilbo, who was still thinking uncomfortably about eating. Fortunately, he had once heard something rather like this one before, and getting his wits back, he thought of the answer. Wind, wind, of course, he said, and he was so pleased that he made up one on the spot. This'll puzzle the nasty little underground creature, he thought. And I in a blue face saw an eye in a green face. That eye is like to this eye, said the first eye, but in low place, not in high place. Said Gollum. He had been underground a long, long time and was forgetting this sort of thing. But just as Bilbo was beginning to hope that the wretch would not be able to answer, Gollum brought up memories of ages and ages and ages before, when he lived with his grandmother in a hole in a bank by a river.
My precious, he said. Sun on the daisies, it means, it does.
But these ordinary, above-ground, everyday sort of riddles were tiring for him, and they also reminded him of days when he had been less lonely and sneaky and nasty, and that put him out of temper. What is more, they made him hungry, so this time he tried something a bit more difficult and more unpleasant.
It cannot be seen, cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. It lies behind stars and under hills, and empty holes it fills. It comes first and follows after, ends life, kills laughter.
Unfortunately for Gollum, Bilbo had heard that sort of thing before, and the answer was all around him anyway. Dark, he said, without even scratching his head or putting on his thinking cap. A box without hinges, key, or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid. He asked to gain time until he could think of a really hard one. This he thought a dreadfully easy chestnut, though of course he had not asked it in the usual words, but it proved a nasty poser for Gollum. He hissed to himself, and still he did not answer. He whispered and spluttered. After some time, Bilbo became impatient. Well, what is it? He said. The answer's not a kettle boiling over, as you seem to think from the noise you're making.
Give us a chance! Give us a chance, my precious!
Well, said Bilbo after giving him a long chance, what about your guess? But suddenly Gollum remembered thieving from nests long ago, and sitting under a riverbank, teaching his grandmother to suck
eggs,
he hissed.
Eggs as it is!
Then he asked,
alive without breath, as cold as death, never thirstier for drinking, all in mail, never clinking.
He also, in his turn, thought this was a dreadfully easy one because he was always thinking of the answer. But he could not remember anything better at the moment. He was so flustered by the egg question. All the same, it was a poser for poor Bilbo, who had never had anything to do with the water if he could help it. I imagine you know the answer, of course, or can guess it as easy as winking, since you are sitting comfortably at home and have not had the danger of being eaten to disturb your thinking. Bilbo sat and cleared his throat once or twice, but no answer came. After a while, Gollum began to hiss with pleasure to himself.
Is it nice, my precious? Is it juicy? Is it scrumptiously crunchable?
He began to peer at Bilbo out of the darkness. Have a moment, said the hobbit, shivering. I gave you a good long chance just now.
It must make haste, haste,
said Gollum, beginning to climb out of his boat onto the shore to get at Bilbo. But when he put his long webby foot in the water, a fish jumped out in a fright and fell on Bilbo's toes. Ugh, he said, it is cold and clammy. And so he guessed. Fish! Fish! He cried. It is fish! Gollum was dreadfully disappointed. But Bilbo asked another riddle as quick as ever he could, so that Gollum had to get back into his boat and think. No legs lay on one leg, 2 legs sat near on 3 legs, 4 legs got some. It was not really the right time to ask for this riddle, but Bilbo was in a hurry. Gollum might have had some trouble guessing it if he had asked it at another time. As it was, talking of fish, no legs was not so very difficult, and after that the rest was easy.
Fish at a little table, man at a table sitting on a stool, the cat has the bones.
That, of course, is the answer, and Gollum soon gave it. Then he thought the time had come to ask something hard and horrible. This is what he said.
This thing all things devours, birds, beasts, trees, flowers. Gnaws iron, bites steel, grinds hard stones to meal, slays kings, ruins town, and beats high mountain down.
Poor Bilbo sat in the dark thinking of all the horrible names of all the giants and ogres he had ever heard told of in tales, but not one of them had done all of those things. He had a feeling that the answer was quite different, and that he ought to know it, but he could not think of it. He began to get frightened, and that is bad for thinking. Gollum began to get out of his boat. He flapped into the water and paddled to the bank. Bilbo could see his eyes coming towards him. His tongue seemed to stick in his mouth. He wanted to shout out, "Give me more time! Give me more time!" But all that came out with a sudden squeal was,
Time! Time!
Bilbo was saved by pure luck, for that, of course, was the answer. Gollum was disappointed once more, and now he was getting angry and also tired of this game. It had made him very hungry indeed. This time he did not go back to the boat. He sat down in the dark by Bilbo. That made the hobbit most dreadfully uncomfortable and scattered his wits.
It's got to ask us a question, my precious. Yes, yes. Just one more question to guess. Yes,
said Gollum. But Bilbo simply could not think of any question with that nasty wet cold thing sitting next to him and pawing and poking him. He scratched himself. He pinched himself. Still, he could not think of anything.
Ask us,
said Gollum. Bilbo pinched himself and slapped himself. He gripped on his little sword. He even felt in his pocket with his other hand. There he found the ring he had picked up in the passage and forgotten about. "What have I got in my pocket?" he said aloud. He was talking to himself, but Gollum thought it was a riddle, and he was frightfully upset.
Not fair, not fair, he hissed. It isn't fair, my precious, is it, to ask it what he's got in its nasty little pockets is?
Bilbo, seeing what had happened and having nothing better to ask, he stuck to his question. "What have I got in my pocket?" he said louder.
Said Gollum. It must give us 3 guesses, my precious. 3 guesses.
Very well, guess away, said Bilbo.
Handses,
said Gollum. Wrong, said Bilbo, who had luckily just taken his hand out again. Guess again.
S,
said Gollum, more upset than ever. He thought of all the things he kept in his own pockets. Fish bones, goblins' teeth, wet shells, a bit of bat wing, a sharp stone to sharpen his fangs on, and other nasty things. He tried to think what other people kept in their pockets.
Knife,
he said at last. Wrong, said Bilbo, who had lost his some time ago. Last guess. Now Gollum was in a much worse state than when Bilbo had asked him the egg question. He hissed and spluttered and rocked himself backwards and forwards and slapped his feet on the floor and wriggled and squirmed, but still he did not dare to waste his last guess. Come on, said Bilbo. I am waiting. He tried to sound bold and cheerful, but he did not feel at all sure about how the game was going to end, whether Gollum guessed right or not. Time's up, he said.
String or nothing,
shrieked Gollum, which was not quite fair, working in 2 guesses at once. Both wrong, cried Bilbo, very much relieved, and he jumped at once to his feet, put his back to the nearest wall, and held out his little sword. He knew, of course, that the riddle game was sacred and of immense antiquity, and even wicked creatures were afraid to cheat when they were played at it. But he felt he could not trust this slimy thing to keep any promise at a pinch. Any excuse would do for him to slide out of it. And after all, that last question had not been a genuine riddle according to the ancient laws. But at any rate, Gollum did not at once attack him. He could see the sword in Bilbo's hand. He sat still, shivering and whispering. At last, Bilbo could wait no longer. Well, he said, what about your promise? I want to go. You must show me the way.
Did we say so, precious? Show the nasty little baggins out of the way, yes, yes. But what has it got in its pockets, Not string, precious, but not nothing. Oh, no.
Never mind you, said Bilbo. A promise is a promise.
Cross it is impatient, precious, hissed Gollum. But it must wait, yes, it must. We can't go up the tunnels so hasty. We must go and get some things first, yes. Things to help us.
Well, hurry up, said Bilbo, relieved to think of Gollum going away. He thought he was just making an excuse and did not mean to come back. What was Gollum talking about? What useful thing could he keep out in the dark lake? But he was wrong. Gollum did mean to come back. He was angry now and hungry, and he was a miserable, wicked creature, and already he had a plan.